For most of my life, I've often found myself overwhelmed with both malevolent and non-malevolent spiritual entities. I've also found myself to be very gifted when it comes to knowing things that I shouldn't know about people when I meet them for the first time, especially if I shake their hands or look into their eyes. I never asked or tried to seek out these gifts or abilities. I guess I was just lucky and born with it. To give a little background on me, I'm Native American, and my family lineage is that of what is commonly referred to by many people as that of a medicine man. So with that being said, I began being groomed in the practices of spirituality and native medicine at a very young age. All my life, I've been told by my mentors, elders, and my mom that I have exceptionally strong gifts and extremely powerful abilities. I've always taken that with a grain of salt. However, so many times throughout my life, my mood would cause poltergeist and PK activities, or phenomena to manifest in my home or the homes and places of the people causing my mood. This became so prevalent that I even worked with some researchers from the University of Virginia, the Perceptual Studies Department, who studied and documented my gifts and abilities. I have such a hard time rationally accepting that they are real. I've struggled to accept this my whole life because it honestly makes no rational sense and seems like something you'd only see in a movie. I'll never forget the PhD grad student telling me during my initial assessment intake interview at the University of Virginia that she genuinely believed me when I said I had these gifts and abilities because I told her that they scared me when they happened. It really made a difference to help me finally accept that I could do and know things that are unexplainable, or communicate with spiritual beings because I've always had such a hard time believing that any of this was real. Many times, my abilities freaked out those around me, sometimes even myself, especially when I was in a relationship with someone. It pains me to say that I've not always used my abilities for the greater good of humanity, especially when people have intentionally hurt me. There was a time in my life that I was very much about taking out revenge on those who I felt had intentionally wronged or hurt me. I've also been a magnet for deceased or spiritual entities for as long as I can remember. Until a few years ago, I was somewhat successful using meditation to calm myself down, or I was able to use my spirit guides to protect me until I was about 4 years ago. Around the time I lost my beloved grandmother. That was about when the activity became too much to bear. I knew she was about to pass, and I knew she was going on to another life. Losing her was devastating because I knew she was moving on instead of staying with me. Ultimately, moving on is for the greater good, and what we all should strive for. But I'm a selfish person sometimes, and I wanted to stay with me. After her passing, no matter what I did, I couldn't silence the spiritual entities or stop the psychic phenomena from happening. It became overpowering and incredibly toxic. It cost me a relationship with someone that I truly loved because she couldn't handle it anymore. For example, if I got really sad or if I got angry at something or someone, scratch marks would manifest on her arms, etc. She was being attacked by spiritual entities as well, and I don't blame her for leaving. I loved her enough to know to let her go for her own well-being. As all of this was coming to a head, I read somewhere that some people lose their gifts and abilities when using ADHD or other mental health medications. I also remembered my gifts and abilities being relatively under control back when I was in high school and college, when I was on Ritalin. So being desperate to make everything stop, I went to the doctor and got on Adderall. Of course, I didn't see the real reason why, but I got on with it nonetheless. Even though I'm now dealing with a lot of guilt for taking this medicine to quiet and slow everything down, the last 4 years have been so much more peaceful and quiet. But here's the thing. I know that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing with my gifts and abilities. I'm feeling extremely overwhelmed with guilt for using this medication to keep the chaos quiet. It's even started to negatively affect my professional and personal lives. It might even be fair to say, I've put curses on myself for the actions I've taken to get some peace and calm. It almost feels as if the universe is punishing me unless I get back on track to do what is I'm supposed to be doing for the greater good, whatever that means. But I honestly don't know what that is. All my life I've been told that I'm here to help and heal, both people here and in the spiritual realm. But I never wanted these abilities or responsibilities. I never asked for it, and quite frankly, I don't think I'm deserving of such a huge responsibility. I know so many people would love to have what many refer to as psychic gifts and abilities. To them, I say be careful what you wish for. Little do they know they already have it, they just haven't learned how to use it. For instance, I hated it when someone looked at me and I knew that their spouse or parents or significant other, etc., was physically abusing them. How many times did I have to embarrass myself by walking up to a stranger to tell them they don't have to be a victim anymore? Encourage them to get help, and then go through that awkward stare before they asked me how in the hell did I know what was going on in their private life. I hated looking at people and knowing that their death was coming very soon, had an undiagnosed illness, or that they made a really bad choice pertaining to a major life decision. I hated looking at people and knowing all of their fears, doubts, etc. I especially hated the battles with malevolent entities, or having to explain poltergeist/PK phenomena whenever I got into a new relationship. So that's why I got on the ADHD meds. I guess I say all of this to say whoever will hear this and not think I'm crazy, please help me and give me advice on what I should do. Please share with me what you did and how you were able to keep it under control. I know a lot of people are going to read this and roll their eyes. I'm sure they're going to laugh and tell me to lay off the drugs. But I know that there are a few people who genuinely know what I'm going through and will give me sincere and solid advice. I have no doubt that I've put curses on myself by using this ADHD medication to keep my gifts and abilities manageably quiet over the last few years. Quite frankly, I'm scared of them. I've always been scared of them. I don't know what to do moving forward. I mean, I do know what to do, but I don't know how. I also know I don't have a lot of time left, mostly because people with these gifts and abilities take on the issues that the dead had while they were living, disease, depression, etc. I know there's going to be someone who will read this, though, that has gone through the same struggles and doubts that I'm going through, and will be able to guide me on where to go from here. I know that they had a hard time accepting their gifts and abilities too, but they were able to overcome this fear and accept the truth, and move forward in helping those, both in the physical and spiritual realms, that were put in their path to be helped or moved on. It was August 14th, 2021, approximately 11:12 p.m. I know because I wrote it down as soon as it happened. My boyfriend and I were just driving home late at night when we saw the whole moon disappear. It was a waxing crescent, so almost entirely full, and suddenly the bottom of it began to slowly disappear as if it were an eclipse. I made him pull over because I was excited to watch it happen, even though I was unaware if an eclipse was even supposed to occur that night. As we saw it disappear, I looked up lunar eclipse August 14th, 2021. Nothing came up though. I searched for it so many times and nothing showed up. I even checked official NASA pages to see any possible information about it, and there was nothing. It said the last one happened sometime in June, and the next one will be November 18th/19th. I thought maybe something was blocking it, but it was clear and cloudless night, and we drove around and searched for it for hours, and it never reappeared. We live in the LA area, so I checked Twitter to see if anyone else had seen what we saw. I saw a few tweets from people who lived in surrounding areas who said they had seen the moon disappear a few nights before. Also, some of the tweets would show up, but when I would look at them on the person's page, they would disappear and never show up again, even when I searched. It looked like the moon was disappearing in LA around 11 p.m. every night for about a week. I've never seen any explanation as to why, though. We have no idea what happened, but it was terrifying. We spent a while there taking photos, and I remember nagging my mum to let me look through the photos on the camera first. There were orbs and such in a lot, but I remember getting to this one and being like, whoa, there's a huge white blob on this one. Then I passed the camera to my mum and sister, and they could make out a face in it. They were freaked out because this photo was taken from the car, aimed outside through the window. In the bottom left corner is the mirror on the car, I think. I remember I printed off version and took it to primary school, but when I grew up and remembered this, I couldn't find it for years. The camera used was one used on holidays over the years, and photos had been deleted, etc., to make space for new ones, which in my teens I was mad about because I thought this must have some sort of importance, right? I used to beg my mum to take me back so I could take photos and look around, but she'd rarely want to because this scared her, and she felt the place had a bad vibe. But I managed to get to swing by the place a few times, mostly in the day, but never really got a photo anything like this, or anything out of it at all. A few months back, I started thinking about it again and asked Mum about it. She mentioned she might have emailed it to a friend, so I went on her email and ta-da! Finally found it after literal years. I'm 21 now, and I've had this at the back of my mind for years, but seeing it again didn't really make me feel relieved. I figured I should send it somewhere or something. I'm not an expert, and so I can't really explain this photo to myself. And with that being said, I kind of fall into the it's something paranormal mindset, and it bugs me because I don't know. And if it is, I don't want it to just stay in an old email and never really be looked at. This story took place sometime last year. I'm not sure of the dates, but it's not really relevant. I was laying down on my side facing the wall next to my bed. Basically had no view of the rest of my room, as it was behind me and out of my line of sight. I had a bunk bed as I shared a room with my younger sister. I was on the bottom bunk and I had my phone laying sideways on my bed in front of me because I was scrolling through social media on it. The room was dark with hardly any light coming in from the window. I'd been laying there like that for a while before it got dark and stayed there until the sun was going down. The darkness didn't bother me because I was so focused on my phone, and it's not like it was pitch black. I was watching a video, distracted by my bright phone screen, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye walk past me. As stereotypical as it sounds, I saw a dark person-like figure walk behind me. Like I said before, I shared a room with my sister, so this didn't seem unusual, and I figured it was only her. It only struck me as strange when I felt the bed next to me sink, and I heard the mattress squeak. It was like someone sat down next to me. I brushed it off as my sister sat down and kept my eyes on the phone. Now keep in mind, I hadn't moved at all the entire time, so it's not like I could have been the cause of the noise or anything else. After what I thought was my sister sat down, I began talking to her. I asked her questions like, "What do you want?" and "Why aren't you responding?" It became apparent to me that she didn't want to talk, and it pissed me off. It had only been roughly 45 seconds since I thought she sat down, and after getting fed up with her non-responsive behaviour, I finally turned around. Of course, as you can probably guess, no one was there. Freaked out and confused, I looked over to my door, which was slightly cracked open, and realised there was no way my sister would have gotten into the room to sit down and left without me hearing the door creak. Jumping off my bed and rushing into my living room, I asked both my mom and sister if either of them had been in my room recently. Both of them said no, and when I told them what just happened, they brushed it off and moved on. To this day, I still don't know any logical way to explain what I had experienced. Crawling noises. This is not something I experienced, but rather something my sister heard. It was sometime late at night, and me and my sister were up late playing video games. There had been times before this where me and my sister would sit outside of the bathroom door when the other was in there, in an attempt to scare each other when we got out. It was an eerie time, probably around 2 to 3 a.m, when my sister got up to use the bathroom. I remained in the room we shared and continued playing video games while waiting. After a few minutes, she walks into our room a bit startled. She looks at me and asks, "Were you just crawling outside the bathroom?" I was shocked and honestly a little creeped out when she asked. Of course, I told her no and asked her why she thought I was. She explained that she heard what sounded like someone crawling across the floor outside the bathroom. Loud thumps that I apparently didn't hear, despite being one room over. I thought she was just messing with me, but I have a good BS detector when it comes to her, and I knew she wasn't just trying to scare me. I'll start with the most recent. I have a small black Christmas tree with battery-powered purple lights on my art desk for the season. I've used it for a few years now, and nothing strange ever occurred with it, until recently. The first day I had it up, the batteries died in the lights, and since I'm a chronic procrastinator, I've yet to replace them. The first night the tree's lights all turned on bright at exactly 2:45 a.m. and remained on for a minute. Okay, not a big deal. Weird, but perhaps the battery still had a very small amount of juice. I tried to turn it back on and once again it wouldn't respond. I chalked it up as a fluke. Then it kept happening. The next 3 days it turned on at exactly 2:45 a.m. and remained on for a minute before the lights all went out again. The fourth night, my husband had a night shift the next day, so he was up with me when it happened and he experienced it for the first time. He thought I replaced the batteries, but I have yet to buy new batteries for it. There are none in the house. I told him about how it happens every night. He believed me, but at the same time said it couldn't be at the exact time each night. Well, the next night, last night, he was up with me again because he was off work the next day. The tree did it again at exactly the same time. Let me be clear, the lights have a simple on-off switch. No time or anything. I can't explain it. My husband, formerly a huge skeptic, proposed something that really emotionally hurts me. He said maybe it was the time of death of my dad who passed away this year and lived in the apartment above ours. We didn't have an exact time of death from the coroner. I hadn't heard from him in 2 days, which was actually normal, but when I called him and he didn't call back, something was wrong. My husband went up to check and he had passed away. Due to those circumstances, we don't have an exact time. This idea really upsets me. The next occurrence happened a few months before my dad passed away, and a few weeks before losing my dog. I'm a night owl. I typically stay up working on art or reading a book all night and then go to bed at 6 a.m. Anyway, I was up late at night, drawing in the living room on the couch, and my husband was sleeping in the bedroom. I had our dog with me, Misty. She was always with me. We heard footsteps coming behind the door rapidly, like my husband was running to the door. I say we, because Misty reacted as well and ran over to the door with her fur standing up. I honestly thought my husband was in a hurry to get to the bathroom, but then the door never opened. I went to check on him and he was fast asleep in bed. Okay, so he must have been sleepwalking, I thought. I went back to drawing and eventually Misty and I heard it again. Still, he didn't come through the door. It kept happening. So I waited without any of my art stuff piled on me so I could jump up and check real quick the next time. When it happened again, I jumped up and immediately pulled the door open. My husband was asleep in bed. There's no physical way he could have run at the door and then been back in bed before I opened the door, especially without me hearing him. Our house is very long, with the bedroom being the longest and taking several seconds to cross at a run. I opened the door when the footsteps got to the door exactly. I was half a footstep away from the door, sitting on the end of our sectional. Misty was really freaked out by this as well. I told my husband the next day, and he said he was probably sleepwalking or something like I originally thought. So we slept on the couch the next night, and it happened over and over again that night. But this time, there was no one in that room to possibly cause it. My dad's apartment was above the bedroom, but not the whole distance. His apartment starts at the halfway mark to my bedroom. He couldn't have caused the footsteps unless he'd climbed through his window or walked on the roof. which I even asked him about, and he said no, he hadn't and wouldn't do that. This happened every night for weeks until Misty was found to have a tumour in her stomach, and I had to let her go. Then the footsteps just stopped. Haven't heard them since. But she was always with me when they happened. It definitely wasn't her causing them. They sounded like a grown man running across the length of the bedroom to the door. I have no idea what to make of that. Why would they suddenly stop the first night she wasn't with me? I've had many small things happen to me, but I'm trying to stick to the larger events that really impacted me. Before these two events, the next one that comes to mind was almost 10 years prior. I was living with my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, and his father in a small trailer park in the middle of nowhere. There were maybe 10 trailer homes total, with a dirt road coming off an old route. Behind our home was a small section of trees, only a few deep, and then a large cornfield. I was relieved to be away from my mom, stepdad, and the creepy house I grew up in, which I'll get to in a little bit. I used to walk around the area alone at night and never had any fear or problems. I'll call my boyfriend/husband Pete from now on to avoid confusion. One night, Pete and I were coming home from the mall, and it was a really long drive. I don't see well at night, so I let him drive my Blazer. His dad worked a night shift and was already at work for a few hours. When we pulled into our normal parking spot and shut the engine off, I was hit with this awful dread. I've never felt dread this intense before or since, and I hope I never do. I knew there was something or someone in the trees by the trailer, and if we got out, something awful was going to happen. I can't explain this fear and knowledge. I've had this happen before, but never to this degree. I turned to tell Pete to not get out, to drive away instead, when he turned to me and asked if I could feel that. We drove away and didn't go back the rest of the night. We returned at daybreak when his dad was just getting home. I looked back in the trees, but I never found anything. I seriously cannot explain the feeling I got, and Pete confirmed he felt it too. It was like just knowing that we would die if we attempted to get to the house, and whatever awful thing that would cause it was in the trees, just out of sight. I truly feel like we dodged our deaths that night. As I said this before, just not as bad, but Pete was the first person to ever feel it with me as well. I kind of believe that may have been a person with very bad intentions, but I'll never know. Before that, the other incidents that stood out to me with a similar feel happened when I was 16 or 17. I was on a trip with my dad, who was a truck driver at the time. I was walking to the bathroom through the truck stop parking lot by myself. I go to the bathroom so often that my dad just said he trusted me to be fine going on my own. Just inform him and go. So I did. I was walking through the few rows of trucks between us and the building when I all of a sudden stopped cold. I knew something or someone was waiting for me around the next truck. Just an awful feeling that I should not go that way. I headed back to my dad and he walked me to the truck stop bathroom and we left that stop afterwards. Now, I'll tell you about the experiences I had growing up. I had so many that I'll try to keep them brief and only tell the most intense ones. Like most kids, I saw a lot of things when I was really young. My mom's side of the family was actually afraid of me. I don't remember it clearly enough, but I've been told that I just had a way of knowing things I shouldn't, and impossible things happened around me. When I was 10, we moved into a new house that was built by my stepdad's grandfather. To everyone's knowledge, no one ever died in the house, but it's menacing and active anyway. I have a brother who's 7 years younger than me. Immediately after moving in, he would wake up screaming and point to his toys. I remember it was every night. Then one night, I understood because I saw his toys moving on their own when he was sleeping, and I went to check on him. My mum and I used to hear a child's laughter coming from my brother's room. We always assumed it was him, until he started sleeping at his aunt's house on the weekends, and we still heard it. I would see black shadows in a human shape constantly from the corner of my eye, which would disappear when you try to look at them directly. My stereo would turn itself on and off constantly. The lights would do the same. The kitchen cabinets would open and bang shut. This was all normal in that house. My stepdad never believed us until he had an experience alone in the basement, but he refused to tell us what happened. Even after this experience, my mom and stepdad always just told me and my brother to ignore it, because we were not going to be moving. When you live with that kind of daily thing and attitude, you just start to shrug things off. There wasn't really much choice. I had a candle collection when I was about 14. One day, I heard a bang and the shelf they were all on collapsed. The weirdest part was all the candles were standing up on the floor, like someone placed them there. I never had a friend stay the night more than once. They were all terrified by the middle of the night and would wake me up because they had experiences. One girl claimed she saw the shadow person. Another said something was touching her foot in the night. I never disclosed anything about the house because I didn't want them to panic and not want to stay again. When I was about 15, I became friends with a girl I will call Elle. She was a self-proclaimed witch, and I have to give her credit she didn't scare as easily. We were sitting alone in the living room talking, when all of a sudden we heard a knock on the window behind my head. Assuming it was my brother playing a prank, I pulled the curtain away really quick. He wasn't there, and the knocking immediately moved to the window across the room behind Elle's head. The window behind me was on a balcony. Totally possible someone could be on it. The one behind Elle was 3 stories off the ground and no possible way for someone to reach. There were no trees close to the house at all that could cause it. It was instantaneous that the knocking changed windows too. Elle actually decided to stay, but by morning, she said she would never stay over again either. She wouldn't say why. We're still friends today, and she still doesn't talk about anything other than the knocking. Won't say what else bothered her. I'll finish with one last thing. I grew up having nightmares of something chasing me. I know that's a typical dream theme, but these always felt warped and wrong. I would dream it was a shape-shifting thing. It preferred the shape of a rat, but would shift into anything to get close to me. It was always trying to bite me. I never managed it before I woke up, but it was awful. There was always something wrong with whatever it was impersonating. Something was out of place. That's how I knew it was the same thing, only a different form. Now, it's very possible this was just a dream, but it stopped when I moved out of my mom's house. I would feel dread when I woke up from dreams like that, not to the degree of the other incidents I detailed here, but still dread. My husband and I have been having terrible luck. It kind of feels like something is out to get us, and we just always mention it, but in a joking, frustrated manner. We're trying to move from the city and state that we live in, and now it feels like something is actively causing problems, so we never make leeway. I started having dreams that we had to cleanse our house and look for someone to maybe cleanse us, because everyone wishing us negative intentions was building up, and it caused something to attach to us. I thought these were just dreams, but they kept increasing and getting worse. I first told my husband, and to my surprise, he said he felt it too and wanted to try cleansing. He was the world's largest skeptic when we got together, but being near me has caused him to question everything because weird stuff happens around me. We mentioned this to a friend and he gave us some sort of special wood to burn and explained how to use it to perform a cleansing. My husband has been pushing for 2 weeks to do it, but I kept feeling so drained that I always said I didn't feel like it. Tonight, he said enough is enough, and we were going to do it. We started in our bedroom where it always felt more ominous. As we started, we both felt a tingling sensation that felt like static electricity all over our bodies, and the hair on our arms stood up. In the middle of doing the bedroom, we both freak out because we look up into the mirror that was my grandfather's and swear we see a dark figure reflected in it by the closet. So after gaining our composure, we go over and make sure to cleanse the mirror and the area it reflects. The insane thing? I swear to you, the whole figure freaking disappeared. We watched the room seem to grow lighter in the mirror. I've never seen anything like it. We continue throughout the house, and each room we begin in the static electricity feeling covers us, but disappears when we're finished with that room. Finally, we reach the last room, and as we're lighting the wood, my husband had a mini panic attack where he almost dropped the wood and lighter on the ground. He starts yelling about spiders on his arm. I know for a fact that he would never pretend something for the purpose of scaring me, and I've never seen such fear on his face. It only lasts about 20 seconds, and he calms down after hitting his arm with his other hand, like he was trying to smack the spider off. He told me that it was the weirdest thing he had ever experienced. He swears that in that moment he saw a very large spider on his arm, but at the same time it wasn't there. We hurry up to finish that room, and in doing so, the house. He was shaken up for a while, and it really freaked me out. And when we were done, the apartment felt so much lighter. I never understood that reference until we experienced it, and it's really the only way to explain it. What do you make of this? Have you ever heard of this happening? Is there anyone we should know? We're considering doing the cleansing a few more times, just to be sure. When I was little, I heard this story from my great-grandpa. He lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm going to tell it from his perspective to make it easier for the both of us. Years ago, my wife and I came home from a night of drinking with friends. I decided to have one more drink before bed. After making my drink, I realized my wife had already made her way to bed, so I went out back and finished my drink under the moonlight. After my drink, I got ready to go to sleep and quietly made my way to bed. While I was laying down and just starting to fall asleep, I heard the room of my door open, so I jumped up wondering who the hell it could be. It was my brother. He came in and sat down on the bed beside me. My brother passed away 15 years ago. I sat up in disbelief, starting to wonder if I had a bad drink. Before I could find my voice, he started talking. He said, "I know this is strange, but I came here to send you a message. I had to come tell you myself face to face. God is on his way to make you firstborn son. I'm sorry, but this is how it has to be. It's God's plan, and I wanted to be here for you and tell you that I will be there to take him myself." After a few more words, he left. I didn't know what to think. My boys are adults and living on their own now. I felt like this had to be a dream. None of that makes any sense. The next morning, I woke up with that still fresh on my mind, not knowing what to think, but soon let it go. That day, I had conversations with both of my boys on the phone and they were great. At that point, it was out of my head and I continued with my day. That night, my oldest son lost his life in a motorcycle accident. I'd wake up in my room in total darkness and feel the worst unexplained fear, feeling like something is right there watching me. Then I'd wake up and realize it was just a dream and my room isn't as dark as I thought it was. Then it got worse. From once every few months, it went to once or twice every month. And every time the dream advanced, first I tried to turn on my floor lamp, and when I did, I woke up. Then the floor lamp stopped working in the dream, so I'd use my phone light. Then that stopped working as well, so I'd have to either turn on the switch on the wall or get out of the room to be able to wake up. This experience has gotten worse since Halloween, and I started to get other types of activity as well. On Halloween night, I was alone at home with my friend, and the light was on in the kitchen. We heard the light switch turning off, so we thought thieves got in and got really scared and called a friend. When we got here, we realized everything was fine, just the light switch was off. Since then, I've had more activity. Switches turning off when I'm home alone, door shut open in the middle of the night, a damn candle lit on fire out of nowhere one night, and the dreams got worse and worse. So I started keeping track of the time and noticed it's always between 4:50 and 5 a.m. Only once it was 5:50 a.m, but I was sleeping in a different room. The dreams got worse and worse since last month when I moved the bed to another place in my room. They're now followed by sleep paralysis and seeing dark shadows when I wake up. Last night, I had insomnia, so I couldn't sleep until 4 a.m. when I took a melatonin pill just because I didn't want 4:50 a.m. to catch me awake. As I was falling asleep, my eyes just a little bit open enough to see my room, and I saw a human looking like a shadow coming out of the wall next to my bed and crossing my room. When I got out of my view, I jumped and turned on the floor light, but nothing was there. I had the feeling I was watching and also the unexplained fear. It was 4:10 a.m. Today, my mother was in the kitchen with her friends and a glass exploded out of nowhere. She's extremely skeptical about this stuff, but I told her everything and she wants to call a priest. Turns out she's been woken at 5 a.m. every night too. This happened in May 2015. It was night and I was in my bed talking on the phone with my friend when I noticed something move on the wall in front of me. I got closer and a strange worm-like shadow was just oscillating there over and over. I'm like, what the fuck? My friend says it might be a web, but when I get closer to it, it senses me and instead of oscillating back, it goes up until it reaches the ceiling where it starts moving really fast. So I go back to bed wondering what it was. But when I look at the wall, it's back there doing the same thing as before. I got a whisk, waited until it was in the middle of the oscillation and moved it over the shadow, but still there. It didn't even flinch. Because it was just a shadow, I thought it must come from somewhere. So I tried turning off the light and using my phone light. Still there. So I played with the curtains, turned on every light source in my room, then off. It didn't matter what I did, it kept oscillating. I couldn't find what was making the shadow, so what else was left to do than trying to touch it? Getting close to it was kind of hard. I had to wait until it reached the lowest point on my wall while oscillating, and then jump on my chair and touch the wall before it could run. That's how I found out it wasn't a web or anything like that. The thing went right through my hand. If I had my hand on the wall, I could see it above it. But once I slowly pulled back my hand at about 2 to 3 centimeters distance, it would just appear back on the wall behind my hand. I had no light source that could do that. At this point, I felt like what was going to be from my life from now on. A shadow worm casually oscillating on my wall. I was at peace with it, but I wanted to try one more thing before going to sleep. When it was reaching the ceiling, its movement changed. It was acting like a snake and moving so fast I couldn't see it. I have a fake ceiling with lines on it, so it was really difficult to keep track. So I got up on a chair, touched the ceiling, and waited. I saw it coming really fast toward me, so I pulled back my hand, and it detached from the wall with a small part that I think was the head, trying to follow me. It was only for a second and just like 1 centimeter. It was the first time in my life when I saw a shadow that had no surface behind it. That was the first moment that night when I felt fear. I have no idea how I was able to fall asleep after that, but I was tired and I thought that if I wanted to hurt me, it could easily do it. Next morning around 10 a.m, it was still there. I went back to sleep for an hour and at 11 it was gone. I'm sad I didn't find out where it went. My wall felt empty without it. My friend was on the phone most of the time, and it didn't believe me, so I used my iPad to record the thing. I'm happy I did that now, because I have videos of it. One of my classes was held in a cemetery recently, because we were meeting with a guest speaker to learn about some of its inhabitants. While several of its inhabitants have died violently, the program was not gory or unsettling, and focused on the accomplishments of those buried there. Regardless, strange things began to happen almost immediately upon arrival. One of my colleagues began feeling ill and was on the verge of unconsciousness. She had to return to her car to rest. A few minutes later, another classmate lost all colour. He became white as paper and then began to sway. As he collapsed, several people rushed to catch him. At this point, everyone became nervous, but the program continued. One girl expressed concern that there may have been something wrong with the air to make the class sick. While no one else complained, several of my other classmates, usually quite tan as we live at the beach, began developing a deathly pallor of grey and white, and were almost as pale as the man who fainted. We began hearing a woman screaming in the forest surrounding the graveyard as we trudged further into it, despite us being in a part of town miles away from any school or playground. This area is pretty much nothing but segregated graveyards side by side. There were at least 2 or 3 miles of graves. In fact, I was lost for 20 minutes that day while trying to reach my class, and I could neither find the road nor them. I only encountered one other person at the time, a woman walking her dog. These are very old cemeteries, and most of the bodies there belong to people who are not remembered by anyone alive. So there are few visitors beyond historians and genealogists. The guest speaker completely ignored the horrible sound, and we all exchanged some uneasy glances as she continued. I became dizzy and lightheaded, and it's not terribly unusual for me, because I faint frequently anyway and seldom sleep as much as I should. The others who sickened, however, had no existing medical conditions and predispositions to fainting. They were asked this by the professor in case they needed an ambulance. Both are thin and healthy people. The temperature was also cool, almost chilly, so it wasn't as if they overheated. Anyway, I just thought it was a weird thing to happen, especially so close to Halloween, when they say the veil between this world and the next is at its thinnest. The chances of two healthy people entering pre-syncope and syncope within minutes of another for the first time in their lives is extremely low, unless there's some sort of environmental factor possible. I googled it, and apparently it's not very uncommon for people to faint in graveyards, so I was wondering if anyone has a good explanation for that phenomenon, natural or supernatural. The first time I did was at an old cemetery in the town I grew up in. My friends and I snuck out of the house and met up in the cemetery. The part of the United States I live in doesn't have a super long history like the East Coast or Europe. But in the area, there used to be Native Americans and early graves were there, from just after the Civil War era, like the late 1870s. The gates around the cemetery were low at some points, so we just hopped over, and we ended up by a statue that was like an angel in mourning. It was about 10 feet tall, and you couldn't see the face of all white stone marble. The thing about this statue is it was said to be a haunted cemetery, and that strange things happen to the statue at night. Mostly stories from older teens passed down. We picked that area and brought a couple candles and a small flashlight for light. It was a bit windy, and even though our candle was in a glass jar, it kept blowing out. Some of our friends moved over to the newer Marsailema area and sat on the marble benches to have the candlelight. A couple of them had enough and ran back home. I opted to stay seated under the statue until just before dawn, as I knew my mum would get up and know I wasn't there. I had a little throwaway flashlight, as I didn't want to attract any attention by any cars driving late at night, even though I doubted they would see it from the street as the cemetery had slight hills. At just before 3 a.m, everyone left and went back home, but I opted to stay. I sat there under the statue all alone. In the distance, I heard animals which weren't out of the question for the area. I was afraid of coyotes or mountain lions, but not really, and had a plan to run to the mausoleum, as there was a section that had a gate that was closed like a doorknob but didn't lock. Shortly before 5 a.m, my brain started playing tricks with me, as I swore the statue moved its head and hands several times. I jumped and turned on the flashlight. There was also a faint light that went slowly off and on, but it wasn't like headlights, almost like a candle being blown out. At first, I thought it was my friend playing tricks on me, but the light never came closer or moved in a direction. Eventually, I got up and ran home, but here was where it got the most unnerved. I ran through the cemetery, then had a sudden feeling like I was being chased. The part of the cemetery I was heading for was towards the newer section, as that would have led me to the street close to my house. Suddenly I changed direction and went to the nearest fence with the street access. But as soon as I ran in that direction, I'd forgotten that section had an older chain link fence, and so I cut again back towards east. And when I eventually hopped towards the wrought iron fence, I felt like something was going to pull me back in. I kept running back home and was afraid to look back. I can't explain what caused me to lose it at the very end, but I felt like I was going to throw up because my mouth was so dry and I was covered in sweat. I did stop when I reached the opening to my street, and there was a stop sign. I grabbed it and started dry heaving. My mouth was so dry and my heart was pounding in my throat. When I was sure I wouldn't make a sound, I went home and stiped off my clothes in the garage. As they were all dirty, and it would have been more natural if my parents saw me in my boxers and sweaty dirty jeans and sneakers. I went to the kitchen and drank what seemed like 10 glasses of water. I went to my room upstairs very quietly, and the next morning my mom asked if I had gotten up early that morning. She said she thought she heard crying. I just said I got up because I was thirsty and that I wasn't crying. She said, "Yeah, I know it wasn't you. I thought you were watching TV upstairs." I never told my friends the end part of what happened, just that I waited till morning and went home. I didn't tell them about my freakout, the water, or my mom hearing someone crying. On my mother's side, there was a story that had been told since I was a kid, and before me to my older siblings, cousins, and even my younger aunts and uncles. It's somewhat of a ghost story, but as a family stories go, the times and details get muddy. When the story was first told to me, it took place in the early 1920s, and here how it goes. A family member, it varied from great-grandmother to great-grandaunt. Well, she was a little kid, and the family were travelling and decided to pull over and picnic and camp for the night. I always assumed that they were part of the Dust Bowl movement because the story was they were heading to California. The story goes that during the night, the little girl, my great-grandmother or great-grandaunt, hears screams and yelling. She runs and hides and looks out from behind a tree as she witnesses her entire family being hacked to death with an axe. The law was if you want to be the site and camped there, you could hear their screams, and no one ever caught the Axeman killer. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, through Ancestry.com and researching my family history, I confirmed with a great-uncle the truth of our family story. My great-great-grandmother was a survivor of the Apache massacre in New Mexico. I ended up visiting the site, and there's a wiki page about the 1861 massacre where they attacked settlers that were on their way to California. My family's wagon train was crossing the area, and my great-great-grandmother's family was all killed. She was the only survivor from the family, and ended up being adopted by a local family. Our family name was lost as she was so small. Also, the story was that her mother hid her so that she wouldn't be killed. She was later found by a garrison militia in the area and turned over to the Catholic Church nearby. I know there have been several issues where animals can sense stuff that humans cannot. We all know they have a more keen sense of smell and hearing than us. Would that extend to a paranormal sense? My wife and I walk our dog once in the morning and once in the evening. We live in the centre of a neighbourhood where we have a few streets behind us and a few streets in front of us and long streets to our side that connect to the entire neighbourhood out to the larger cross-traffic streets. Often, our evening walks with her are in the late dusk to night time. Sometimes she freaks out when there's nothing there that is visible to us. Now, she isn't the kind of dog to bark at other dogs, but usually will want to play with them or just curious about them. She doesn't even bark at the neighbourhood cats. Also, rarely barks at people, unless they're men wearing hoodies. Our biggest issue is the street in front of us. She absolutely refuses to go up to that street. Whenever we try, she'll either whimper, cry, and pull away. So we don't force it. The first time we noticed this, she yanked back so hard, she slipped out her collar and ran back to our street. A few weeks ago, I was walking here in the evening and not paying attention to where we were walking, as I was responding to some work emails on my phone, and I went down the other side of our block and towards that street. She stopped and noped it back to the other direction. So I know it's not something at that corner, as she knows that way on both sides. A few other times that we'd gotten home late, I walked her not in that direction, but down another street she stopped and was staring at a brick wall like if someone was there, and she covered her head like if she was scared. I turned on my flashlight, thinking maybe a small animal that it couldn't be, but nothing except a brick wall. I've had many encounters with ghosts, shadow people, and other various entities in my time. Sometimes they're scary, but nothing has ever felt like this before. When I first encountered this demonic presence in my trailer, I instantly knew. This is dangerous. This is bad. This is the worst paranormal entity I've ever experienced in my life, and I need it gone. I tried to commit suicide at the very end of November. After my hospital stay, I stayed with my mom for 2 weeks. When I got back to my trailer, that's when all this started. My suspicion is that the extreme negative energy I put out in the time leading to my action, and the action itself, essentially invited the demon in. It hasn't followed me to my mom's. I've been scared here, but mostly scared of encountering the presence, not necessarily experiencing it here. I stopped by my trailer today and it was instantly clear that there was some disturbing presence in there still. I theorise it's confined to my trailer and cannot or does not follow me elsewhere. I could go into detail about what's been happening, but this is asking for help on how to expel it. If anybody is interested in details, I can add some details later. Long story short, it is very clear to me this is a demonic presence, nothing else. I'm moving back into my trailer tomorrow morning. I'm very nervous. I have some witchy friends that I've confided in who are going to help me with the following plan. Salt every entrance, windows and the door. Open windows and sage the interior of the trailer. Should I include exterior? Draw multiple witches' knots and hang above every window and door. On Friday, today's Wednesday, I move home Thursday. My friends will come stay the night and we'll create a witch's bottle and place it in the appropriate place on the property. For comfort, I'll be leaving all lights on throughout each night. This hasn't helped with expelling the presence whatsoever, but it helps me feel more comfortable. If anything gets overwhelming, I have a key to my friend's house and can come stay the night at any time. But I want my house back. I don't want to keep running. Does anybody have anything else I can possibly do? I'm particularly afraid of the period of time between moving back home and when my friends can come over to perform the witch's bottle. I know the demonic presence feeds on fear, and I try to control myself as best I can. But the bottom line is that this is the most terrifying paranormal experience I've ever endured, and it's hard not to be scared. I feel unsafe, literally physically unsafe. I want my freaking home back. Any additional things I can do are welcome. I'll do anything and everything to get rid of this. And if everything I do is not enough, I'll know it's time to bring in the big guns, whatever that ends up being. A priest, I don't know, anything. Thanks everyone. Please wish me well.